Okay.
Hello, everyone. We should be live now. Welcome to our chat of Jekyll and Hyde. I am so excited about this. So I'll start with me. My name is Patricia Meredith. Welcome to my channel. I am a historical mystery author of books set in 1901. And in one of the books, one of the conversations involves the discussion of Jekyll and Hyde. So I really wanted to do a buddy read with this one, and I've got three lovely ladies who join me in reading this. We'll see if we all enjoyed it or not. It's going to be a wonderful discussion. I'm so excited. So one of the ways I like to come at this book is from a historical perspective, but that's because I've read it so many times. There's different ways of reading it and enjoying the discussion that comes out of it. So why don't you each introduce yourselves and tell me if this is your first time reading it? And if it was your first time reading it, have you seen any adaptations of it? So a film or TV show or musical. If you haven't seen the musical, it's excellent. So we'll start with Tori.
Yeah, whatever direction I'm in. Hi, I'm Tori. I run the channel Tori Talks here on YouTube, and I'm also a fantasy author. And this was my first read of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I have seen the musical. Remind me who the lead is in that.
Oh, it's a rock opera that it's, I don't know.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's been a while, but I have seen it. So yeah, this is my first experience with the book, but not necessarily the story as a whole.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, my name is Kayla. I have a channel called Kay's Hidden Shelf. I read fantasy, sci-fi, and a smattering of other things, as you can see in the classic here. This was my first time reading through this, and adaptation-wise, I actually haven't seen the musical. Most adaptations that I've seen are just a short portrayal of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in a fantasy setting, which completely did not match this.
How about you, Evie?
So, hi, I'm Evie. My channel is She Was Only Evie. I don't post a lot of stuff. I do a lot of this type of stuff, of discussion and like lives, and it's great. Anyways, I had never read Jekyll and Hyde before. I had never seen any adaptations other than, I think, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I think Jekyll and Hyde was a character in that, in the really bad Sean Connery movie. But I love it. It's fine. And like, so, but even before that, like, I feel like Jekyll and Hyde is so much in the zeitgeist at this point that even if you didn't know anything about it whatsoever, you know Jekyll and Hyde at the core.
Exactly. Yeah. Which was kind of how I wanted to start our discussion was, what kind of impressions did you come with ahead of time of the book? Because I feel like that can definitely impact your reading of something. And a lot of people come to Jekyll and Hyde knowing, well, like even in the Marvel Avengers, right? Hulk is an example of Jekyll and Hyde right there. But it's not anything close to what's in here. So, and it's very different than a lot of the perceptions that come into this one. So, so what are some things that you came with thinking you knew already before you started diving into your read?
I gotta get my notes. I mean, I tried to come into this pretty low, like zero expectations. I try really hard with classics to take them as they are and not put expectations on them too much, because there's like Evie said, there's so much just kind of in the culture at this point, threads of it that get kind of, messed up and pushed into this and that and changed. And so it's always interesting to see how different, it's like the Disney movies versus the actual original fairy tales kind of thing. I didn't really have any expectations. I was the one thing that I was surprised by is that I thought that it was, in the musical, they're obviously played by the same actor, whereas in the book, they're very physically different.
Right.
Which was not what I was expecting. So that was something that kind of surprised me.
By the way, this is not going to be a spoiler-free discussion.
Spoilers.
Like Evie said, this is in the zeitgeist. So I'm assuming you know what the twist is to Jekyll and Hyde. Even though that's something that my characters discuss in the book is, oh my gosh, they're the same person. Mind blown, because people did not expect that when they read it when it first came out. But yeah, so spoiler alert, Jekyll and Hyde are the same person.
I think it's very much implied on this back summary. So
yes,
like, yeah.
Nowadays, I mean, because that's the thing is, like, when it first came out, nobody knew what to expect, right? In fact, the biggest commentary that I found, so the version that I read is the essential Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. So it had a whole bunch of things from modern day impressions, and then in the back it had like contemporary reviews from like 1886 when it came out. So like one of the things they say is I love this part. So he's talking. This is an unnamed review in the Times from January 25th, 1886. He says, the strange case of Dr. Jekyll is sensational enough in all conscience, and yet we do not promise it the wide popularity of Called Back by Mr. Fargus. Have any of you heard of Called Back by Mr. Fargus?
Nope.
So and a lot of the reviews are like that. Are like, well, this is good, but it's not Poe. Or, oh, it's a lot shorter than I thought it would be. Or, well, everything that happens in it is very improbable. It would never actually happen in real life. And then he says, like, yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah.
It is short. It is improbable.
Exactly.
So not wrong.
Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, I just thought that was interesting. So Kayla, how about you?
Yeah, it did not meet any expectations I had. I like similar to Tori, I kind of wanted to go in with minimal expectations, but with it being so much a part of our lives and the way it is, it was a bit hard because I had seen representations of that character in a lot of fantastical movies, including the old and probably horrible Van Helsing movies with Hugh Jackman. Yes. Where he's gargantuan and like a brute, an absolute brute and a monster. I was just underwhelmed a little bit by Mr. Hyde in this.
Right. Well, actually, that's another really good point that in both with the Marvel, with Hulk, and then in Van Helsing, like usually Hyde is portrayed as this big hulking figure, but he doesn't start that way in the book, right? He starts as a dwarf. And then he builds up. And that's definitely, that usually it's very surprising when you read that. And you're like, wait, that's Hyde? Okay.
Yeah. And I can imagine for the time that was probably very off-putting to have someone who was just generally, not a pleasant person to be around and gave off an innate feeling of wrongness, to look so horrible. But in my mind, I just couldn't picture it because we're exposed to so much more with it, something much more fearsome. And I think in that way, it was a little underwhelming for me.
How about you, Evie?
I'm waiting for the Evie rant here.
Yeah, here it comes.
Go.
Listen, so one of my favorite novels of all time is Frankenstein.
Okay.
So I, combined with having, comparatively recently read Dracula, I had it in my mind that Jekyll and Hyde was going to be akin to those.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a detective novel. And I really like detective novels, which, as I was telling Tori and Kayla, I'm really scared to read Phantom of the Opera because I know that now that I'm an adult, that's a detective novel. And detective novels are not my thing. They're very plot driven. I'm very much not a plot driven reader. I like characters, and I'm just like, this is fine.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Now, to caveat that, most detective novels of the Victorian era are very plot driven.
Yeah.
I would argue now, Tori and Kayla, back me up here. Like my books, I try to do character driven.
They're very
Right? It's all about the
character-driven.
characters. It's just the mystery changes per thing, but I try to treat it more like I love watching detective shows, right? But it's all about the characters for me. That's what pulls me in and keeps me in there. So that's really interesting, though, that you said Frankenstein and Dracula and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because those are definitely, usually those three are said in the same breath, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're definitely compared. But they're very different. Do you want to go into that a little bit more? How it was different?
Yeah. So again, Frankenstein Frankenstein is another one where it's so much in the zeitgeist, that popular culture has really just morphed Frankenstein into something that is not from a textual perspective, like the source material. And I see so many times people coming to Frankenstein as new readers. They'd never read it before. They'd only seen it in popular culture, and they're so disappointed and even just disgusted with the book because it's not what is popularized and portrayed in popular media. And I admit I'm probably victim to this in a way with Jekyll and Hyde. And then with Dracula, in the comparison, this sounds bad. I had no desire to read Dracula. I had no pull to it, but I was doing a buddy read at the time. And so I truly had no expectations because I was just like, I guess I have to read this. Fine. And then I got hooked because I was like, I had no idea what to expect.
Right.
Mind you, Dracula, even though it's called Dracula, a lot of the complaints seem to be there's not enough Dracula in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the point. It's like it centers around Dracula, and it's just so like
right. In fact, all three of those are considered monster horrors.
Yeah.
Right. But all three of them are not monster horrors. Instead, they're in fact they're all really examining that duality of man. Right. That's the whole theme of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Is trying to separate the dark from the light within us, and can you do that? And the answer, unsurprisingly, is no. And just getting into that, I know. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler.
That actually goes into one of my other questions that I had, was like other evidences of duality that you might have seen in Jekyll and Hyde, because that really jumped out to me this time. I kept noticing descriptions like Jekyll's home is nice in the front and dark in back. Right. And it just made me think of that happened a lot in the book. And I thought Robert Louis Stevenson did a good job of that. Like it's woven through, that theme is woven throughout the entire book. It's not just in Jekyll and Hyde, but there's also the question of, is there really a difference? Right. It's still Jekyll's home. That whole building is Jekyll's home, but it's nice up front, dark in back. So is that a reflection of what ends up happening with Jekyll, and can he really divide the two, or are they just integral to each other? What do you guys think?
Well, in a way, for me, it's not just about the duality of man. It's I guess you could argue that this is basically the same thing, but the conscious and subconscious aspects of the brain, and kind of the baser instincts of like the front, what is it, the temporal frontal lobe or whatever, where you have the smart mind, wise mind, and then like the more animalistic like instinct parts of the brain. So I feel like Jekyll and Hyde kind of represented those aspects of it as well, not just good and evil, or good and bad. But I'm gonna shut up so I can let other people talk.
I was great.
You were say so much.
The cage match.
I love it.
Tori, go ahead.
Well, for me, at least, I don't personally see it, as I was getting through the book, as I guess that was probably something I also expected with this novel, is that there was going to be more of a separation between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I actually didn't find there to be that much separation between the two of them.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is because in the language that Jekyll uses, especially in the letter at the end when he's describing everything, the language that he uses to describe Hyde and all of the things that Hyde does is very Jekyll controlled. I sent, I did, I let, I like, it's a lot of him. You know, he kind of, oh, woe is me, all these terrible things happen, but he's also intentionally choosing to give Hyde that kind of spotlight and that kind of, you know, and a lot of the ways that he would talk about himself versus Hyde didn't give me kind of that as much of a duality feel as I thought it was going to.
Okay. Yeah.
So I guess I was trying to think too. I had a really great thought, and of course it's like well, kind of what Evie was talking about, that Hyde kind of is like intrusive thoughts made manifest, which kind of goes back to the subconscious versus conscious kind of discussion. So it's like, what if Jekyll just did whatever he felt like whenever he felt like it and didn't have that like nice image all the time? And like, to me, that was, so I didn't get as much of the duality, I guess, as I was expecting to, as if they were completely separate and Jekyll has no control over anything, because he clearly does. So
yeah, to add to that, I could see the duality in the beginning where it's all mystery and it's through a third party perspective until we get to the letter. And there was a specific scene that he was describing where he said he woke up in Mr. Hyde's body.
Yes.
So that part to me told me that he had the same mentality, the same mind throughout the transformation. If he had woken up and said, oh, now I'm Mr. Hyde and I'm going to behave like Mr. Hyde, it just, to me, that scene would have been written differently if it was more of a duality between the two characters. But because he described it as, I woke up and panicked and took a potion to fix it, tells me that it was Dr. Jekyll's mind working in the background, but he was stuck in this body.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, and that was one of my last questions was, do you think that Jekyll succeeded? Because I don't think he does at all.
No.
Yeah. So what did he do?
Messed up.
Did he? I wonder if it's more of just like, you know how when you're drunk and you lose your inhibitions, it's more like that, you know, where you lose your inhibitions and he's just like, oh, I can do whatever I want. I can't, you know, nobody knows it's me. I can go do anything and be as evil as I want. But then he realizes that there's still consequences to his actions, right? He's still being held responsible, and that continually is coming back to him. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I mean, who hasn't wanted to murder a child by running them over? So
which that was another thing was so often in the movies and stuff, he does murder her, but I noticed in my reading of it that he doesn't. They actually go into great lengths to say that the child's okay, that she
that was one thing that I had to read. So my part of my frustration with this admittedly is, even though I've read a lot of classics, well, enough to be knowledgeable about it, I struggled with Robert Louis Stevenson's prose style.
Okay.
And I can't put my finger on why that was. Yeah. So I had to read that first scene a number of times. Thank you. I mean, that's just a number of times. I'm like, wait, what happened? Like, did he kill her? Did he just run her over? Did he just, like, you know, take a cane and like whack her? Like, what happened? So I assumed that she was dead, but then I realized, oh wait, she was fine. But then in my mind,
that's like a lot of the aspects of Hyde. We don't actually see him being that evil until he murders somebody. That's fine.
Well, okay, but that's how everybody in the book treated it. Oh, I was so mad. I was sitting there and I can't remember what the exact phrase was that they said, but there was a point where they're talking to or Utterson is talking to the police officer, I think, and he's saying something about how, well, we need to find Hyde, and the police officer says something about, well, he's disappeared. That's a good enough.
Yes.
I'm like, and this guy that he murdered is like some kind of lord.
Yeah. No, yeah. It's very clear that Stevenson, this is his first time writing mystery. You also have to remember it's 1886. So actually this is this pre-Sherlock? It's definitely pre-most mystery that we associate today. There's Poe, Anna Catherine Green, Gaboriau, and all of those. But there's very little Moonstone, so Wilkie Collins, that kind of thing. But there's not a detective genre yet. There's not a mystery genre. It's actually called criminal romances at this point. It's not until 1900, after Sherlock Holmes has conquered the world, that it becomes known as detective mysteries. And so it's not its own genre yet. So yeah, it's very clear that Stevenson, he's writing a supernatural thriller, a horror, and
it doesn't
not
have to make sense.
Mystery. Exactly. Yeah. In fact, there's lots of coincidences and things where you're like, okay, you didn't follow up with that, and why did that happen? And
I did make a note that I think might speak a little bit to what Evie was experiencing, because I have had this issue with other classics as well, and that is that sometimes in the prose in different classics, and it's not in all of them, but there are some others that I've read that I've had the same issue with. It's like the way they describe, you never get any defining features of anything. It's always like, this was a man who looked as if he had a greatly burdened conscience.
Yeah.
Okay. That could look like any number of things on any number of people, and so it's a lot more that kind of description as opposed to any kind of physical description other than his height and that people felt weird about him.
Right.
Okay.
You think part of that is because it's men and not women being described?
I mean, that's a whole conversation we could have. But the other thing too that I've noticed, and this drives me nuts in classics, is whenever they're like, and it looked kind of like this, but also like this completely opposite thing. And I'm like, okay, so you've told me absolutely nothing, except you've used a lot of words to do it.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Well, could be this.
And then like Kayla was saying with Les Mis, so you've got these two spectrums of Victorian literature. You've got Jekyll and Hyde with absolutely no real description of anybody, and then you've got Les Mis with chapters devoted to the backstory of the priest and things like that. And so yeah, it's interesting.
Well, it's also interesting to look at it like I would more say, mind you, I have very little experience reading Dickens, but from just everything I've heard, there's Robert Louis Stevenson with very bare minimum, then there's Dickens, whereas I feel like the French literature of the Victorian era is, again, of what little I've read, it's just different. It feels different. I mean, obviously it's written a different language, translated differently, and I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, there's the cultural differences too, right? Along with the translations, because not everything in French is going to translate properly. There are just some things that don't translate. So they'd have to kind of figure that out, how to redescribe it. But then, there is that cultural difference in addition to the historical time period. So, my kind of impression was that this author was just trying to get something out that would be shocking. And writing it as quickly, maybe not as quickly, but writing it as short and punchy as they could without resolving on finished tie-ups, these loopholes. There's that one conversation where Utterson is talking to Jekyll, and Jekyll had just kind of, spills about blackmailing as a means of kind of getting him away, sort of thing, or explaining the situation. And Utterson's kind of like, well, cut your ties, and that's the end of it. No, as a lawyer, there's a lot more to blackmailing.
Utterson was kind of a horrible lawyer, to be honest.
Yes. He was more of a friend than a lawyer.
Yeah.
He like it's one of those, you know, can you be a friend or a father, right? And you can't really be both. You can't be a friend and a lawyer. You have to be one or the other.
I don't recall. Was this serial? What was this published as a serial, or was this?
No, it was it was released as a novella, just straight up. Yeah. And actually it's interesting that you say it sounds like it's just punchy. It is. So he wrote it overnight the first time because he had a dream. So he had, and he writes about it in his memoirs about this dream that he had. Restless nights interspersed with horrid dreams. It was from one of these that when Fanny, so his wife is Fanny, when Fanny woke him, he was still crying. Stevenson complained that she had waked him just as he was dreaming a fine bogey tale. And so then he sits down, he writes it overnight. She reads it and she says, "This is crap." And he says, "Oh, you're right, it is." And he throws it in the fire. And then he takes 6 months to try to write it again.
Sounds like a normal writer day.
So yeah, exactly. It's like, oh yeah. So I have to be careful when I'm reading my husband's work, and it's not that you should talk about it. But here, let's work on some things. So, but it is interesting that then he went back and he rewrote it. It takes him 6 months to rewrite it, and it's very punchy. It is. It's short, quick, to the point, and all of that. And someone just asked, where did I find all this background info? This book. So if you want to read Jekyll and Hyde, this is the way to do it. The Essential Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because it's annotated and it has all of this background stuff. So like this is, it's a 60-page book, right? So this is the book, and this is my footnotes under each section. Jeez. So lots of background, lots of going into the details behind it and talking about how he wrote it and all sorts of things. So it's excellent. It's so good. I've found very quickly that my way of reading classics is definitely with annotated versions, because then you get all the historical aspects and all the different critiques of it coming from a feminist point of view, or different points of view. And it's so interesting when it all comes together. So in fact, one of the things that I did want to bring up was something I was asking my husband to remind me what he says, because he has this great thing where he says the difference between horror and fantasy and science fiction. So he says the horror is the exploration of the capability of man to the depths of depravity of the monster and the heights of the protagonist's goals, versus fantasy, which explores what might have been. Science fiction explores the capability of man, what could be. And that's basically the three supernatural, or looking at humanity, right? There's three different ways of looking at humanity, and that's why each of those genres exist, right? And then I would argue we also have mystery as another one, and mystery is also it's what depths, what drives somebody to go to the point of murder. That's usually what it is, right? What is it within us, and what is the motive behind it? That's what interests us so much in reading a murder mystery. So yeah. So
well, I did want to say
you found that. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I did want to say, kind of stepping back a little bit to when you were talking about like how he had the dream and stuff like that. Again, to go back to Frankenstein, because I'm obsessed. It's interesting to hear that, because obviously Mary Shelley, like, obviously we don't have all of the inspirational context around works. So hearing that Robert Louis Stevenson, his story came from a dream, and Mary Shelley's came from a dream as well.
Okay.
It's really good.
What are these writers on?
Well, yeah.
Mary Shelley was probably doing some weird stuff.
Probably Stevenson too. Yeah.
So
it was funny at the very beginning when you mentioned some of the contemporaries and talking about Poe and talking about. I actually think, as a Poe fan, I would enjoy this story if Poe had written it better.
Okay.
Because I think he would have leaned into a lot of the things that Stevenson kind of leaned away from. That I wanted more
more of the psychological
Yeah.
So that's definitely what draws me to Poe, is the psychology. Yeah. His are fascinating.
I'm a big fan.
That's a very good point. Actually, he was compared to Poe quite a bit, and so that's an interesting comment. That
he's like the noble, bright version of Poe, though. Let's be real.
Yes. True. Even with all the darkness and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's definitely
yeah.
Opiates abound. Yes.
Yes.
I have really quickly, this is a total aside, but I found a quote that I will be using in regular daily life from this book because I don't know why. I probably was because I was reading this section at 1 o'clock in the morning, so I found it more hilarious than it probably was. But there's a part at the end when they're going to break down the door into Jekyll's cabinet, and it's Utterson and whoever the other guy is with him, and they're going to bust down the door, and they pull this it's the butler that's with him, and they pull this footman over, and his name is Bradshaw, and they're like, okay, you're going to go get another guy, and you're going to go around back and make sure that nobody runs away if he tries to escape. And Bradshaw's like a mess because apparently all of the servants are in a huddle in the living room, like weeping and wailing, all of them. Which I was like, okay. And then Bradshaw comes over, and he's kind of trembly and weirded out, and Utterson is like, pull yourself together, Bradshaw. And I was like, I will be using that now for pull yourself together, Bradshaw. Like, we're gonna go find a serial killer. It's fine. Pull yourself together.
Right. Yeah. He definitely. It makes me wonder what Stevenson's relationship was like with his servants, because he definitely, the way he paints servants is very interesting. It's not a very positive light. It's very, and yet it is. I mean, because Poole is like there for Jekyll, right? He's like, nope, I'm in. I'll do anything to protect him. Who is this voice that's answering me and all of that, right? But there's still, it's interesting looking at Victorian literature and looking at the different ways that they would portray the servant aspect. Yeah. Kayla, any thoughts?
So I actually want to go back to Tori's quote here, because didn't Mr. Hyde, the transformation back to Jekyll, shock someone to death? Can we talk about that? and this person's just like, get it together.
Yes, exactly.
Because, like, again, it was underwhelming. And then to find out that this person was shocked so severely that, weeks later they were on their deathbed and going, funeral was after that. And you're like, okay, well, nothing really describes it as being terrible. It just happens. Right.
So I wonder how much of I'm going to call them frustrations as modern readers that I had, and that some might have, is that there's a lot of cultural inference that Robert Louis Stevenson is relying on his readers to make. So obviously, he's writing in a different time, and there would be assumptions made by the readers of that time that would make more sense, if that makes sense.
Well, like the assumption, like that British that British reticence, right? You read that a lot in Victorian books about how they won't show their feelings, and they won't. It's very reserved and very following the etiquette. There's lots of rules of society. It's very specific. You have to wear a very specific type of outfit. There's all these mourning rules and all of that kind of thing. Mourning, MOUR, like for grief and when someone dies. And so, yeah, he's absolutely, I think, relying on the assumption that, well, a British man wouldn't A, show his feelings, and B, let that part of himself out, right? So it's
Which
a lot of
adds to the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Right.
You don't allow that aspect out. So.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You have to keep it locked away, right? Yeah. Not that it didn't exist, though. And Dickens is a great example of he loves to uncover the underbelly of London society, and reveal, that, there's a lot of darkness in there, and everybody has I mean, one of the questions I have is, what is the guy who gets killed by Hyde? What's he doing walking around in the middle of the night with a letter to Utterson in his pocket? Like, that's just so random. What's he doing just taking a late night walk? And then what does Hyde say to him that makes him so angry that he has to kill him? Yeah. Right? That's never answered. There's so many unanswered questions in it. And I wonder sometimes, like, if Stevenson had taken more time with it, if he had really developed it more, what kind of story would it have been? Would it have been any different?
Dean Sue had a great question. Was this written in the era of Jack the Ripper?
Yes. I have to Google that real quick. Hold on.
So I wonder
Yes,
if that was maybe
totally
potential inspiration.
yes. And Jack the Ripper was never caught. Absolutely. No, I remember the story. So Jack the Ripper comes afterwards in 1888, and some say that Jack the Ripper was inspired by Jekyll and Hyde. So vice versa. So Jack the Ripper read Jekyll and Hyde and thought, well, why the heck not? And apparently he got away with it because nobody ever caught him.
That's charming.
So, yes, yeah. Which also goes with, because Jack the Ripper was known for killing young ladies of the street. And that's another aspect that it's referenced briefly in Jekyll and Hyde, but we never see it. And yet in every rendition of Jekyll and Hyde that you see even post the stage adaptation is when they first do it. In 1887, so a year after the publication of the book, they released a stage adaptation of the book, and that's when we see the women added. And there's always a pure, beautiful, blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman of high standing in society who is engaged to Jekyll, and then we have Hyde, who is releasing his inner lust with women of the street. And there's usually a particular woman who he has fallen in love with and who is protecting him it's almost like they're trying to show that there is some aspect of Hyde that is lovable. It's really weird. But that's usually a dichotomy that is added there. And it was added just a year after in the stage adaptation. So it makes me sometimes wonder, because Stevenson was involved in that. So did Stevenson look at his book and think, oh, there's no women in this, I need to add that? Or did he add it because he felt it showed more of the cruelty of Hyde and the depravity of his side? And is that an example, your love life, is that an example of good versus bad? Yeah. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was kind of wondering too, Trisha, because, kind of some of the research for that you've talked about on your blog a little bit. I was just briefly looking up like when those first cases of split personality were recorded, and I'm looking at this, and it's like 1791 to like 1885. Mm-hmm. So that would have been something that potentially was like a new topic.
Yes.
Especially for someone like Stevenson, who as a writer would have probably been clued in to like French goings on, because as a contemporary of a lot of the French writers, he probably was more aware of what was going on there than the average person.
Exactly.
Which then, not to like discredit Stevenson at all, but the idea that, oh, I just had a dream about this. I'm like, yeah. Did you? It's exactly. Kind of like, was it actually just from his own imagination, or was it fueled by any of that?
Yeah.
As a delusional wannabe writer who's never written a word in her life, we are all like, whether we're writers or not, we're all not inspired by it, but we're all influenced by outside forces.
Absolutely.
And again, that could become subconscious. He could have been hearing that stuff.
Right.
And then it could have planted a seed in his subconscious, and then he had a dream. And
right.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah. Though his interpretation of those articles. So what Tori's talking about, I just posted a video about mental illness in the Gilded Age and how it was perceived at that time, because that's a main theme in my books. And it's they don't understand it at all. Not surprisingly. But yeah, so it's very possible that Jekyll, that Stevenson was in there by Jekyll, was inspired by, the multiple personalities. At that point, it was called that, or dual consciousness. And at that point, they really just thought it was the two. But a lot of, they perceived it as being more like the creative mind, right? How we make up characters and they're living in our head, and that's the same thing as multiple personalities, and it's not at all with a capital N. And it's interesting to see how those articles probably absolutely influenced him, and how that was at the forefront of people's minds. And that's nothing new, right? We've seen that over and over again where multiple authors will be inspired to write a similar story. And it's like, oh, that person stole my idea. No, they didn't steal your idea. We're just all being influenced by the same thing.
Also,
in fact, there's a whole thing with Agatha Christie about that. So yeah.
Also, we're all human. Like,
right.
We're not like, woohoo, spectacular. There's only so much, our brains can do.
Right.
So.
Well, and there's only so many stories, right? There's whole articles written about like the basic 7 archetypes of story, right? It all comes down to these types and
like
types of characters.
It's like with music.
Yes.
There's only so many notes on a scale.
Right.
Only so many instruments, so many chords, so things are bound to start sounding similar or the same, whatever.
Or you're John Williams and you just write the same theme over and over again. So.
Hey,
if it works.
I know, if it works, why
not? But yeah, so I mean, it's just interesting. Like so Jekyll and Hyde is in the zeitgeist at this point. I mean, as we kind of talked about, but at least from what I've seen, I don't see any like more popular like retellings of this. I feel like things like Dracula and Frankenstein, they do get like not necessarily straight up retellings, but there's a very, very distinct basis in those works, and I don't really see that with Jekyll and Hyde, and I wonder if it's because it's so short. Like, I know we're talking about Poe, but oh gosh, what's her name? T. Kingfisher. She basically rewrote The Fall of the House of Usher and like really like fleshed it out. Yes. I would love to see a writer like that. Tori, Patricia, maybe one of you two can do this. I'm sure it's in the public domain, right?
It is.
Yeah, I would love to see like a more fleshed out, like retelling version of this, since like because maybe that would make me appreciate it more because of the what it inspires. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. 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 Because other than Hulk is the only one I can think of that's really like in the main knowledge of it, and it's another where it's portrayed very much like he has control over it. What is his name? Dr. something.
Bruce Banner.
Yeah, Bruce Banner. Thank you. Yeah, Bruce Banner has control over it. I guess now we've got She-Hulk too, right? But she can control it, and so and then we come back to Kayla's point that Jekyll was still very much in control. Was he letting Hyde become who he was? So
I think.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just gonna say when I look at the back of the book, it actually says that it's an exploration of morality, and I didn't get that. Like, yes, I know there's murders and stuff going on, but there was no exploration of, the inner workings of morality. It was more shock factor.
Yeah.
And like you said, Evie, I would love to see someone, build on this just for that reason. And your comment earlier, Evie, with your experiences with Frankenstein, Dracula versus this, I have to agree that yes, because I love
to do that now.
I loved Frankenstein and I loved Dracula, and yes, they're in the mainstream media and everything, and I haven't seen a whole lot of like the classic movies with them, more so like random retellings, kid shows and stuff, but I still love them so much more than this. And I think it was just a perspective of character driven versus plot driven that really just made this watered down is the best way I can say it. It seems I still can't believe he wrote this in 6 months. Like it feels like he did write this overnight and he kept it and he's like, man, just sit on this for a little while and publish it.
He's like, oh yeah, you can toss that one.
Yeah, I would actually again, something, because I didn't know what to expect going into this. I was surprised to find that the narrative perspective was, at least to start, apart from the letters, was from Mr. Utterson. Like, it's someone completely outside, and I didn't have a reason to be invested in Mr. Utterson. I would have, again, just thrown the ideas out there, like, come and run with them. And,
yes.
This rewritten from the perspective of Jekyll and or Hyde.
Yeah.
That would be fascinating. Like that,
or even Poole.
When I was in,
Or even
Poole would be a very interesting lens.
Or how about Dr. Lanyon? Forced to death.
Then your main character just dies of hysterics and
yeah, I do wonder why he chose Utterson. I think Utterson is like an everyman, right? Mm-hmm. So he's
the Gary Stew,
right? Yeah, exactly. He's just there along for the ride. He's the amateur detective. He's the trying to figure it out. But yeah, it's definitely, when you like the musical is much more focused on Jekyll and Hyde. Like Utterson is very minor,
barely there.
Yeah. And then I think most renditions do that. They because that's what everybody's interested in. That's what everybody talks about afterwards. Is Jekyll and Hyde.
I kind of wonder too, and Kay, I'd be interested because, like, an Evie. Well, Trisha, I don't know how much fantasy you read versus classics and mystery and stuff, but I think too, one of the things that I kept thinking about when you were talking about the impact of like that we were kind of underwhelmed by the shock and the horror of the book. I mean, looking at as a fantasy reader who reads a lot of dark fantasy and grimdark stuff, the kind of books that we have just mainstream now would have, that's so far like out of what they would have even considered writing on paper, I feel like, in a lot of ways. So I think part of it, for me at least too, is to some degree a little bit of desensitization of there's really, that's what you're getting freaked out about. Let me try these, you know what I mean? Like, it's a very different level. But for them, if we take away a lot of that kind of and we also have film, which it's a lot of visual kind of stuff, dark things that we've been exposed to as well. So if you take all of that away, how much more would this have an impact on the reader when it's all from your imagination and you don't have all of these other visual and written media things that are so much darker?
Right.
Well, and then there's also the additional aspect of culturally, and maybe something that Stevenson was trying to portray is the kind of not ideal, I'm trying to find the right word, but the repression of the time. Like, Jekyll is the repressed proper man, and Hyde is this he's totally released, and it's not bound by society's rules of what is.
And yet he's still kind, or not kind. He's his manners. Yeah, he's still very polite. Right, even when he's doing these terrible things, he's very polite.
Yeah.
And so it's like, so you can be polite, but not. Yeah. I had something. Sorry. Go ahead. Keep going. I just wanted to point out that Tori, you're talking about the underwhelming nature of it. So like when you go to the musical or you go see a show, it's all about, can this one actor play two people completely differently, right? And that's the shock value. That's what we go to see, is how are they going to portray somebody completely differently. And when you get a really good actor who does that, it is mind-blowing.
Yeah,
it's amazing because it's so well done. But they do it without changing what they look like, and that's what's different from the book, right? Where there very much is a difference. So well, and then we had a question in Jekyll and Hyde, isn't he trying to do something good with his research, but it backfires? Yes, kind of. His argument is basically that so often later in other renditions, and that was something else that I was surprised by rereading it, was my memory was that that he was trying to separate the good so that you could separate the bad so you could throw the bad out, right? So you could get rid of all the evil in your life and just live a perfect good existence. And that's definitely not what happens in the novel. Jekyll is much more, it's like he's having fun with this. He's like, ooh, now I can do whatever I want. And, and he doesn't, and I have no responsibilities and no ties to anybody, that kind of thing. So I was surprised with this reading to find that, I didn't think he had really a good reason for doing it.
Again, to go back to Frankenstein. Sorry. People are gonna be like, I'm never having this chick on again. She won't shut up about
No, they're all gonna say, I have to go read Frankenstein.
You haven't read Frankenstein? Oh my god.
No, I have. I'm just saying everybody listening is gonna go, oh my goodness, I have to go read it.
Okay. All right.
Frankenstein.
This almost turned into
that is. What's on your
what was it? Oh yes, sorry. Distracted. It's interesting that like both of the characters of Jekyll and Frankenstein have these like goals that they want to achieve and their reactions to the result of their experimentations and their scientific explorations. It's just that's really something like to kind of play off of the intertextuality or whatever of it.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, both of them are experiments where it's kind of the argument for science of, well, if we can do it, we should do it, right? Let's find out if we can do this. Let's build an atom bomb because why not? We can prove that we can do it. No harm will come out of this, right? And same with Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. That's the biggest thing that I remember from reading Frankenstein was like, oh, the monster's not named Frankenstein or Frankenstein or whatever.
Oh, Mr. Frankenstein. I'm assuming you've seen Young Frankenstein, right?
Oh, yeah. And we watch it every Halloween. It's my favorite.
Yes. Frankenstein. It's Frankenstein. Anyways, sorry. But anyways, the more that we're talking about it, the more like, dadgummit. I from a enjoyment level of the story, I'm just like, eh. But from talking about it and like having that more, I don't want to call it academic, but for me it's academic-esque type discussion. I'm very much appreciating it on that level. So thank you.
Good, excellent.
Me with Wuthering Heights.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know about this book.
Wuthering Heights.
How about you, Kayla?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this was okay. I still feel like even after chatting about it, I still feel like there's too many plot holes, conveniences. It's something that's interesting to read and you can read it in a single setting. For me, the most interesting part was the letter at the end explaining all of it. And there are still situations that, like you guys were mentioning, where the author and is just expecting you to understand the cultural and the time, like how people would behave. Whereas we talk about our feelings and mental health and everything all the time, or often enough, right? In comparison. But there was still moments that would happen. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm probably desensitized due to everything that we see and read, but what am I supposed to be imagining? Because I'm given nothing to infer what would be happening aside from he transformed or he did this or he did that. And I'm like, okay, well, I still don't know what I'm supposed to be imagining here, so I'm just going to truck along and keep going with the story. For me, it wasn't enough to make me love it, even after talking about it. It was just an okay read. It's good to have under your belt. And it's an interesting topic to discuss on morality, but I don't think the book did that justice at all.
Yeah.
I agree.
Frankenstein on the other, just kidding.
Yes.
Sounds like that needs to be the next read, though. Has everybody read it?
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite books.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Evie and I have a Frankenstein sisterhood going on.
Yeah.
I reread it every year. So
well, speaking of sisterhood, have you read that? There's a book that's it's like they're all the daughters of the monsters. Or the daughters of it's the daughter of Dr. Frankenstein. It's the daughter of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde. And then the daughter of of Dracula or something like that. And it's oh gosh, what's it called? I'll look it up. Go ahead, you guys talk. Talk amongst yourselves.
Okay.
Sorry, how are you feeling about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
I mean, I think for me, it's I kind of fall in the same camp as Kayla. Like I'm glad to say that it's one of those things I can check off the classics box list. And I love having the discussions about them. This one, I feel like this discussion has been done so much better with other books, even from classic period. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I'm with Kay too on the fact that I tend to be a very character and visual based reader, and so I had a hard time figuring out what I was looking at too, which made me sad because I love those really visceral descriptions of things. So I'm like, give me the like weird, gross details of this transformation. What is happening? Does he have claws? Like, what's happening? Turn him into a werewolf or something. I don't know.
Or even just going into that like psychological depth. Like, I totally agree, Kayla. Like, I felt like there was nothing for me to. I feel like care about is not quite enough of a descriptor. But there just wasn't something for me to latch on to and like, grasp
Well,
onto.
like even like you said, what's happening in the transformation. This is still my biggest pet peeve with this book because someone died watching the transformation of this person and nothing's explained, but like we're just supposed to go, oh, okay, that's normal. Like, no. Tell me what happened so I understand what caused this man's death.
I mean,
right. And it was he's horrified, right? So it's just,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even in Jane Austen novels, like they go out in the rain for 5 seconds and they are bedridden for 6 months.
Exactly. And they're always twisting their ankle, not talking to each other. Okay, so here's the book, The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter by Theodora Goss. And Mary Jekyll is the main character, and she's the daughter of Dr. Jekyll. But she ends up meeting the daughters of the other ones, including Sherlock Holmes and Watson. And so it's Beatrice Rappaccini, Catherine Moreau, and Justine Frankenstein. And it's these women who all come together, and it's fabulous. So, and it's a modern retelling. So so it takes all those elements that you expect from modern retelling. Thank you, Andrew. Here you go. He found it too. And it's twisted. Yeah. It's definitely, I think Jekyll and Hyde is one of those that it needs a resurgence. It needs to be retold with more to it. Yeah. So better. Yeah.
I mean, Corey, you did say it in the in our little private chat here that you and Trisha would write very different retellings of Jekyll
yes,
and Hyde.
we would. I was
that would be fun.
It would be
both wrote it like
one should do Hyde.
Like Trisha's would have way more of a like cool mystery in it. Mine would just be like really dark and like
so you write Hyde and I'll write Jekyll and we'll put the two together.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. Well, did you guys have anything else that you wanted to explore?
No pressure, but I'm open to more classic cage matches.
Yes.
Same.
Yes, definitely. So apparently we all like Frankenstein, so we can't do that one. We have to do a different one.
Why not?
Like, we could do Austen. Please. I'm not a huge fan of Austen, but I like it on some levels.
Persuasion.
I know, but they like you said, they don't talk to each other. Like the entire plot would be torn apart with one line if they just talk to each other.
Okay, I'm gonna propose, no pressure, Northanger Abbey.
I'd be up for that.
That's a gothic one. I could do that one. Yes.
Yeah, I'd be up for that.
I
have not read that one.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think I've said this to you before, Evie, but I feel like Persuasion is underrated.
Oh, I love Persuasion. That's my favorite.
Persuasion is good.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, Northanger Abbey sounds like a good time. And if we ever wanted to do a discussion on Frankenstein, like, please don't make me read it again. I'm kidding.
I was gonna say, like,
Evie was like actually stressed for a second there.
Holy wait, what?
No.
Yeah, that would be an excellent one to discuss.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'd love to look at the history of that. I haven't read an annotated version of Frankenstein. That would be fun for me.
How many versions do you have, Evie?
I have probably. Can I get it far enough? Nope. So that tall one at the very, very, very top. That is my facsimile manuscript edition of Frankenstein in Mary Shelley's handwriting. So.
Oh my gosh!
It was a birthday present to myself. So
awesome.
Treat yourself.
Indeed.
Oh my goodness,
that's awesome.
But yes, I have approximately 20 different editions. So
wow. Yeah, we have like 36 editions of Wind in the Willows. That's the one we selected.
That's fair.
I love Wind in the Willows because there's so many different illustrations. illustrated versions. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, okay, so before we head out, everybody make sure that you subscribe and like and do all the things for everybody. So you want to say your channels again, and then they're all down below, and what you talk about on your channels.
I'm Tory Talks 2 if you search it, because there's a different Tory Talks that talks about different things. I talk about mostly fantasy with a smattering of other things, including anime, manga, film-ish sometimes, and that's about it.
Don't forget author discussions.
Oh yeah, duh. Thank you, Kay. I should. Can you just? You can. You can give the pitch for my channel better than I can. Yes, I also do. Yes, I also do a lot of author interviews and a lot of live stream discussions and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, my channel is Kay's Hidden Shelf. I talk about a lot of fantasy stuff, book reviews, author interviews, random discussions like this, and other things. Yes.
Yep. And my channel is She Was Only Evie. I post very infrequently. I do a lot of discussions of random books of whatever tickles my fancy. Yeah, so if we happen to be reading the same book and you don't mind being on camera to talk about a book on the internet, hit me up. So I will say that I'm more active on Instagram with posting like reviews and stuff like that of books I read. So it's the same. She Was Only Evie is the tag on there as well. So
perfect, excellent. And I'm Patricia Meredith, and I do historical mystery, and so I go into mystery and writing and all the history that goes into writing my books, and a little bit of everything. I'm kind of trying to figure out my channel right now, so I'm kind of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. So it's always something new. So thank you everybody for joining us today and enjoying the live chat and everything. And I hope you found some good recommendations for other books, and hopefully we'll see you again and discuss either Frankenstein or Northanger Abbey here soon. So
yeah, thank you for having us, Patricia.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. All right, thanks everybody. Bye.